3 months ago, a man in a supermarket parking lot called my wife a liar to her face. He wasn't rude about it. He actually laughed. He said, "No way you play for them. Prove it." So she pulled out her phone, opened the club app, and showed him her name on the matchday squad list. He went quiet. Then he asked for a photo. I want you to remember that moment, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why total strangers refuse to believe my wife plays professional football and why one specific night at a half-empty stadium changed everything for both of us. Here's the strange part. She didn't grow up dreaming about this. She didn't have posters on her wall. She played five-a-side with her cousins on a gravel lot behind a bakery. And that was basically it until she was 23. Most players her age had already been through 9 years of academy systems by that point. She had 0. So how does someone with almost no formal training end up on the books of a professional women's club? That answer is coming. But first, you need to understand what actually happens behind the scenes of women's football right now, because it's not what you think, and it's not what the highlight reels show you. Let's rewind further to a Tuesday evening 2 years ago. I remember it specifically because it was raining, and she came home soaked, holding her boots in one hand like they were evidence of a crime. She sat down at the kitchen table and said, "I think I want to try out for a team." I laughed. Not because I doubted her, because I genuinely thought she was joking. She wasn't. What I didn't know then, what almost nobody outside the sport realizes, is that women's football has been going through the fastest growth spurt of any sport on the planet. Attendance at top-tier women's matches has multiplied several times over across the past 5 years. Broadcast deals that used to be worth almost nothing are now worth real money. Clubs that used to treat their women's sides as an afterthought are suddenly building entire academies from scratch, because the sport finally has an audience willing to show up and pay. And when a sport expands that fast, something interesting happens. There aren't enough trained players to fill every roster spot. Clubs go looking, open trials, regional scouting days. Word of mouth. My wife found one of those open trials through a flyer taped to a cafe window. A flyer, not an agent, not a scholarship, a flyer. She almost didn't go. She told me later that she sat in the parking lot for 11 minutes before walking in, convinced she'd be humiliated in front of girls half her age who'd been training since they could walk. Instead, something happened that even the coaches didn't expect. She got noticed, but not for her technique. Her first touch was rough. Her passing was inconsistent. What caught the coaching staff's attention was something you can't really teach. She read the game. She always seemed to know, half a second before everyone else, where the ball was about to go. One of the assistant coaches pulled her aside after that first session and said something I'll never forget, because she came home repeating it word for word. "I can teach a fast player to think. I can't teach a smart player to be fast. You already think fast. Now we just build the rest." That's the part nobody tells you about talent. It's not always obvious. It doesn't always look like the highlight clip. Sometimes it looks like a woman standing in the wrong position on purpose because she already calculated where the ball is headed. 6 weeks later, she signed her first amateur contract with a lower division club called Ravenmore United, a name I'm using here because, honestly, some parts of this story are hers to tell fully on her own terms one day. And I want to protect that, but everything else is real. Ravenmore wasn't glamorous. Training happened on a public pitch shared with a rugby club. Some weeks, players covered their own travel costs. She worked a full-time job during the day and trained at night. 3 sessions a week, then matches on weekends. I used to time her recovery ice baths in our bathtub because we couldn't afford a proper facility. Sitting there for 12 minutes with her jaw clenched, not complaining once. And here's the moment that changes everything. Halfway through that first season, a scout from a top-flight club showed up. Not for her, for someone else entirely. But the player they came to watch had an average game. My wife had the game of her life. I need to pause here and tell you something important about how scouting actually works, because it's almost never what people assume. Scouts don't usually show up looking for a specific outcome. They show up with a checklist and an open mind, because the players who end up getting signed are frequently not the ones the scout originally planned to watch. It happens more than people realize. A scout arrives to evaluate one player and leaves having noticed somebody else instead. That's exactly what happened here. The scout mentioned her name to the club's technical director. 2 weeks later, she was invited to a closed trial, no crowd. No fans, just 4 current professionals and 11 trialists split into 2 teams for 90 minutes. She didn't sleep the night before. I know because I didn't either. She scored 1 goal in that trial, but it wasn't the goal that got her signed. It was something that happened in the 87th minute, when her team was already losing and had nothing left to gain from the day. Most trialists coast in that situation. Why risk an injury for a match that means nothing? She didn't coast. She tracked back 40 yards to make a tackle that saved a goal nobody was watching for. One of the club directors later told her that tackle told him more about her than the goal did. Because goals show you what a player can do when things are going well, that tackle showed him what she'd do when things weren't. 3 days later, she signed a professional contract with a club competing in one of the sport's top domestic divisions. Now here's where the story gets uncomfortable. Because I promised you the truth, not the highlight reel. Her first season as a professional was brutal. She barely played. She sat on the bench for 11 straight matches. There were nights she came home and didn't say a single word. Just sat on the edge of the bed, still in her tracksuit, staring at nothing. I remember asking her once if she regretted it, leaving a stable job for a sport that wasn't paying her enough to live on comfortably. In a system still catching up to what it should be. She said no, and then she said something that stuck with me: I'd rather be irrelevant on a real team than important on a fake one. That sentence is the whole story. Honestly, because plenty of people chase visibility. She was chasing legitimacy. There's a difference, and almost nobody talks about it. Her breakthrough didn't come from a highlight reel moment either. It came from an injury to someone else. The starting midfielder went down in the 4th minute of a match against a mid-table rival, and my wife got thrown on with almost no warm-up. She played 61 minutes, completed more successful passes than anyone else on the pitch, and the manager, in the post-match press conference, said her name for the first time publicly, calling her performance the calmest debut he'd seen in years. That clip is the reason strangers in parking lots now recognize her. That's the moment, not the flyer, not the tackle in the trial. A midfielder's hamstring injury in the 4th minute of an unremarkable Tuesday match. So let's go back to that man in the parking lot. He didn't just doubt her because women's football is still catching up in visibility, even though attendance and broadcast numbers are climbing every single year. He doubted her because the story doesn't fit the version we're used to hearing: the academy kid, the prodigy, the 9-year-old with a personalized training plan. Her story is messier, slower, built on flyers and gravel lots, and ice baths in our bathtub. And I think that's exactly why it matters. Because somewhere out there right now, there's a woman in her 20s who thinks she missed her window, who assumes professional sport is only for people who started young, trained perfectly, and never doubted themselves for 11 minutes in a parking lot. She didn't. I watched her almost turn around and drive home. I watched her cry after being benched for 11 straight matches. I watched her ice her knees in our bathtub because we couldn't afford anything better. None of it looked like a success story while it was happening. It only looks like one now, looking backward. If there's one thing I've learned watching this up close, it's that the moment before something becomes obvious to everyone else, it usually still looks like nothing at all, even to the person living through it. She's playing this weekend. I'll be in the stands, same seat I always take, and somewhere in that crowd there'll probably be someone who doesn't believe the story either. That's fine. She's used to that by now.